7 months ago, I made this game called Grapple, and a lot of you seem to like it, but an equal amount of you pointed out the similarities to a few other games. And after considering a few options, there seem to be two obvious ones. A, continue working on Grapple and deal with this, or B, so how did we get here? Well, let me start from the beginning. The name Godspeed is something that I've had in the back of my mind for a while. I like to make speedrunning games, and the name Godspeed just seemed like the most perfect fit for one of these games set in the heavens or clouds. So with literally only a name, I started a new project and got to work. So the most important thing in a platforming game is the movement, obviously. So I got to work on that first, and here's a quick run through of how it all works. First, add a force in the direction that we're pressing relative to the camera. The issue with that is that we can move a little too fast. So to dampen that out, we can introduce a counter force or drag. But the issue with that is that drag only slows down the problem, so we need another solution. That solution is to just cap the velocity after a certain point, but that means that the whole point of forces has kind of been defeated, so we increase that cap the closer that we get to it. Next, whenever we press the spacebar, we add an upwards force, which obviously causes this issue. So to fix that, we can shoot a ray down from the player's center, and if it hits the floor, then that's when we're allowed to jump. And that's pretty much it, at least for now. So while we have this very basic movement system set up, there are a few complicated parameters that need tweaking, such as the jump height, the max speed, and the drag. So rather than painstakingly tweaking these values and asking my playtesters to give me feedback on what they liked, I had a genius idea. I built this, which allows them to edit the values in real time and find the combination that they like the most. So after letting a few people play around in an empty test scene, I got back what they thought was the best combination and implemented that into the game. Next up, I wanted to get a settings menu into the game, which might seem a little counterintuitive, but to explain why, I'm going to have to go on a little side tangent. The only reason this video is even possible is due to LootLocker, who, while yes are sponsoring this video, I'm not going to shove them down your throats because me and the guys over at LootLocker both agree that it's a great product and it'll speak for itself. So I'm going to use it to build this game, and if you like what you see and want to use it, then go and check them out. It's that simple. More on LootLocker later. So yeah, this is all going to require me to build up the backend system as I develop the rest of the game, kind of like a vertical slice. So in keeping up with that tradition, I'm going to create the settings menu early on. For the design of the settings menu, I went and checked out a few games with UI that I liked and sought some inspiration from them. I looked at Cluster Truck, Jumps, Propulsion, but the one that stuck out to me the most was Sandbox. So using that as inspiration, I created a mock-up in Photoshop. I then went through all of the stock assets I used and painstakingly recreated them in Illustrator before putting the whole thing together in Unity. Then I made some animations for the sidebar as well as the actual pause functionality. One more thing that I decided to add into the settings is a debug menu, which will be similar to the F3 menu in Minecraft and will allow the user to display stats on their screen, such as frame rate, their velocity, among other things. And I won't bore you with the details of how it all works under the hood, but we also have the settings saving and loading between saves. Alright, so up to this point, I haven't really explained what I intend for Godspeed to be. The end result will hopefully be a parkour game split into lots of worlds and levels, and each world will have its own theme and its own set of levels. To make the levels more interesting, I want to have multiple different routes that you can take to finish a level, as well as power-ups scattered around that will aid in taking those different routes. For example, a double jump to get over a high gap or a lightning bolt. I aim to get the base game finished by December, meaning that there will be 3 devlogs on this game, 1 per month. Anyway, most of these features will come in the second devlog, so if you aren't already subscribed, then do so that you don't miss out. A lot of my favourite games use some sort of hub filled with wacky characters and puzzles, so I wanted to give that a go for this project. At first, I played around with some volumetric fog and lights and came up with this. I then took a few days off to work on this game with Timothy, and when I came back, I really didn't like how it all looked. So I went back to the drawing board. I first worked on improving the lighting and skybox, which already looks far better. I then played around with some post-processing such as bloom, and with that, the visuals were pretty much where I wanted them. I've been super interested in architecture recently, and I felt like the Googie style from the 50s would make for a really nice heaven aesthetic, so I tried to design the buildings based on that, and probably the biggest inspiration was the theme building at LAX. So I made this hub building, I then imported it into the project and textured it up. For the player's spawn point, I created another Googie-esque building and an oscillation script to go along with it. At the moment, this building is just floating in midair, which makes very little sense. So I decided to make a cloud spawner for the hub, which uses some very basic maths to spawn X amount of clouds around the outside. I then used the oscillation script from earlier on the clouds to make them bob up and down randomly. So the hub looks cool, but currently it serves no purpose. I want to have some sort of portal that leads to a level select area. So I got to work on modelling the portal and making an animation for when the player gets within range of it. Next, I used some horrible maths to get a cool visual effect on the portal as well as, well, teleporting. So for the level select area, I wanted it to be a very different atmosphere to the hub. So I started by creating an inverted sphere and using that as a makeshift skybox. I then added in a star spawner and made these stars scale and rotate at different speeds. We'll come back to this area later, but in the meantime I made some more adjustments to the hub. So my friend Matt created some park assets for me, and I designed a little park where I want to have some characters that you can interact with later on. Another thing I want to have in the game is a set of collectible trading cards that encourage exploration, which is where LootLocker finally comes into the project.
LootLocker's job in this case is to essentially manage our collectible system. So say we collect a collectible, we can then contact LootLocker to update a database to say this player has got that collectible. Then LootLocker will reward our player with some form of reward.
So I'm going to run you through how I added these trading cards in using LootLocker. So first of all, I set up the game on LootLocker's website, then I downloaded and imported their SDK. Then we need to connect to LootLocker using this tiny code snippet, and yep, that all seems to have worked out. Then back to LootLocker where I can create a collectible. Back in Blender, I created a trading card, then made some art in Photoshop, and finally textured the card. Then I imported this into Unity and made some animations. I then went back to LootLocker and created a reward. Then I added that reward to my collectible. And then finally, I wrote some code to tell LootLocker when the player runs into a card and told them to give them the reward. As a bonus, I wrote some code to grab the number of cards collected and display that in the park. And that's literally all we have to do to get collectibles working. Good luck getting that one. The final thing to do this month is to create a level select system, so I modeled a gate in Blender and set it up within the world. I wanted to avoid UI as much as possible, so you can use physical buttons to choose your level and world, and that is the foundation for Godspeed. I'm actually working with a few musicians this time around, so let me let them introduce themselves.
Ambient music is very nice. For this particular ambient music, I used a plugin called Labs, the London Atmos pack, specifically Broken City, for the main layer. I have these long low notes with a short and higher note every couple of bars. I added a stereo shaper to make the sound wider and more immersive. Then I used the same low notes on this low rumbling sound. Finally, every few bars I used this sound, which is called dolphin whistle for some reason. I turned it way down, drenched it in reverb, and cut out all the high end with FL's parametric EQ. Then I automated the volume to dip down every 16 bars to add a wavy feel. This also makes the ambience loop perfectly. So yeah, that is how I have done this. Good day to you, sir.
Okay, so first in this little thing I added this, and then I added some effects to it, so it sounded like this for the intro. And then I added some drums. And then I added a beautiful synth. And then I added a bass. And then all together it sounds like this.
Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want updates on Godspeed before next month, then be sure to join the Discord server and follow me on Twitter. Both links will be in the description. Oh yeah, and I forgot to say this, but make sure to check out LootLocker in the description.
This is the end of the video. Bark wall and now go back to his cave.